So welcome Year 10 to Lesson 16 of our Flipped Classroom tutorials. This lesson, like the last one, we're going to keep looking at quadratic equations. So what is a quadratic equation? A quadratic equation is any equation that has an x squared term. But it must not have any terms with powers above 2. So x squared must be the highest power you see in the equation. A quadratic equation can look like this: x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. And you've also looked at other ones in our last lesson that didn't have a middle term, such as x squared plus 16 equals 0. Right. So looking at this equation, we can also see that it can look like this, where we've got x squared plus 6x equals 5. And in this case, you would need to push all of the terms to one side of the equation, so that all of it will equal 0. Simply put, to solve a quadratic equation, it must be in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is really important. Alright, well, there are two sets of skills that we need to be able to master before we can actually attempt to solve a quadratic equation. The first skill is a bit of a fun one. What are two numbers that times to give 5 and add up to give 6? This is a skill we're going to have to get quite good at. Now I've put it into easier notation for you. So what times what will give 5, and using the same numbers, what plus what will give 6. Now we know that 5 times 1 equals 5, and also that 5 plus 1 equals 6. So these are our two numbers, 5 and 1. They're two numbers that times to give 5 and add to give 6. Now you try. What are two numbers that times to give minus 6 and add up to give 1? Now I've put the notation down there again. Hopefully your teacher's paused the lesson at the moment and you can have a think, or with a pen and paper, quickly write down what you think are your answers. So, if you got 3 times minus 2 equals minus 6, you would be correct, because the same two numbers add together to give 1. Just be really careful of your negative signs. You need to understand that when you multiply a positive by a negative, you'll get a negative, and when you add a negative number, it will subtract it. Alright, second skill we've got to understand. It's simply that when you times any two terms together and it equals 0, such as x times y equals 0, then one of those terms must be 0. In this case, if x times y equals 0, then x or y must be 0. Simply put, if two things times together to give 0, then one of them must be 0. E.g., 3 times 0 will equal 0, or 0 times 4 will equal 0. Keep this in mind. Okay, so how do you solve a quadratic equation? Let's have a look at this one. We know it's a quadratic equation because the highest term is an x squared term. This one is x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. Step 1. Make sure all of your terms are on the left-hand side of the equation. If they're not, move them there. Step 2. Factorize the left-hand side so it looks exactly like this. You will open up what are called binomials. Alright? Two sets of brackets that are being times together to equal 0. Step 3. Think of two numbers that add to give the number in the middle term of the quadratic equation. I've circled it here. The middle term and the number there is 3. So think of two numbers that add up to give 3 and times to give the last term, 2. So we're back to the game that we played before. We need to find two numbers that add to give the middle term, 3, and times to give the last term, 2. This one's an easy one, and hopefully you could quickly think that the answer to this question would be 2 and 1, because 2 plus 1 is 3, and 2 times 1 is 2. Now step 4, simply put these two numbers into the missing spaces in your brackets. And it would look like this. Our first solution was 2, so x plus 2 would go there. And our second solution was 1, so it would be x plus 1 equals 0. So this is where we started. This is where we're now at. Now we said before that when two things multiply to give 0, then one of them must be equal to 0. So therefore, in this quadratic, we've got x plus 2 times x plus 1 equals 0. So therefore, x plus 2 must equal 0, or x plus 1 must equal 0. So if you need to pause, go over this again if you can. It's a bit confusing, but just follow the steps. If you get to this point, we just now need to solve each solution. We do always get two solutions for quadratics. So if x plus 2 equals 0, then minus 2 from both sides. If x plus 1 equals 0, then minus 1 from both sides. And you'll be left with our final two solutions. X equals minus 2, or x equals minus 1. So let's have a look at all these steps together. Here's another quadratic equation. We know it is because the highest term is an x squared term. So x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. Quickly think, what two numbers times together to give minus 5 and add together to give 4? These solutions would be 5 and minus 1 times together to give minus 5, and 5 plus minus 1 equals 4. Place these two solutions that you found into your brackets. Immediately open them. So it'd be x minus 5, or sorry, x plus 5 and x minus 1 equals 0. Look at the red numbers above. So therefore we now get to our two solutions. That if x plus 5 is being times by x minus 1 and they equal to 0, then x plus 5 must equal to 0, or x minus 1 must equal 0. Minus 5 from the left-hand side, and you get x equals minus 5, and add 1 on the right-hand side, and you get x equals 1. So always remember, you'll get two solutions for every quadratic equation. Please follow the steps nice and carefully, and I've scaffolded it on the worksheet so you shouldn't find it too confusing. Alright, well next lesson we're going to look at something called inequations. I look forward to seeing you then. Have a nice week. See you later, Year 10.